What's up guys, welcome to this review of Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7, the final season of Star Wars The Clone Wars. So if you remember back a few years ago when Disney first took over Star Wars and Lucasfilm, they cancelled The Clone Wars. And yeah, they can never be forgiven for that because this was a brilliant show and who knows what would have happened if it continued. We've actually got a pretty good idea now. On the whole, what did I think of this season? Did it live up to the hype? Was it the worthy finale that the show truly deserved? Well, overall, I thought the season was good. Yes, it's a worthy finale that the show deserved, and it's great to have it back, even if it is for a shorter final season. So, one of the distinct things about this season is you can split it into three very specific, distinct chunks, because there are 3 story arcs, each with 4 episodes. The first one, focusing on the Bad Batch, a group of clones who have been enhanced. One's got super strength, one's got expert reflexes and sight and so on. A middle story arc all about Ahsoka, what she's been up to since leaving the Jedi Order. And then the final story arc all about the siege of Mandalore and bringing the end to the Clone Wars. So, like I said, overall I think this season was good. But I'm going to talk more specifically about each chunk. What did I think of them? I think the first 2, the Bad Batch and the Ahsoka ones, are very fun, very enjoyable. But I do have one big question surrounding pretty much everything in those story arcs. Why? Why did we need these story arcs? This is the final season. Why spend 4 episodes introducing us to this unique group of clones and then never to see or hear from them again? Why spend 4 episodes focusing on what Ahsoka's been doing since leaving the Jedi Order? Which turns out isn't much. And then of course you've got the Mandalore stuff, which is brilliant. So I'm going to talk about that separately. But these first 2 story arcs, I do have questions about them. And they are the ones that let this season down. Again, they're not bad by any means. They're very fun, very enjoyable. In fact, there are some good episodes in there. I just have to question why do them at all. So like I said, the Bad Batch episodes. They introduced this unique group of clones. Each one's got a very distinct personality, look, and abilities about them. They're very interesting. But again, we're just being introduced to them now in the final season. So we see these guys for 4 episodes, and then they're gone. We don't know what happened to them. We don't get any closure to them. It feels like this was very deliberately set up to do some sort of spin-off comic book or whatever else, focusing on them perhaps. And that's one of the annoying things about Star Wars now, is that so many things are being introduced and set up that are then going to be explored later on in another medium, in another property. There are so many elements of Star Wars The Clone Wars, so many characters and story arcs that simply don't even get mentioned pretty much this season. And it's disappointing that they don't get closure, but then we're spending 4 episodes on this new group of people. Then the Ahsoka storyline. The only real purpose behind this, there were 2 purposes behind this Ahsoka storyline. One, what the hell has Ahsoka been up to since leaving the Jedi? That's really interesting. You probably could have established that straight away, where she's just basically doing odd jobs. That turns out what she has been doing. 2, it works to establish that while we are in a universe where the Jedi are going around doing their thing, there are still people who haven't seen Jedi, who still doubt the Jedi, who don't know what the Jedi are all about exactly. And that's interesting. But again, did we need 4 episodes to do this thing? I don't think so. I think you probably could have done it in 2 at the most. But then you've got the final storyline all about Mandalore and the end of the Clone Wars. This was absolutely brilliant. This final storyline makes this season worthwhile as a whole. It's one of the best Star Wars stories ever told. Plain and simple. If it's presented as if it's a film, which makes me think that before they made it into 4 episodes, they were going to do it in a film form, but someone said no, do it as episodes instead. So that's interesting. But if this was a feature film, I think this would be one of, if not the best Star Wars film ever made. It's that damn good. So I've already touched on this a little bit, but this season suffers from providing closure for certain elements. So the Clone Wars, there's a lot of characters who were introduced in this TV show. Asajj Ventress, Cad Bane, then you've got characters like Count Dooku and General Grievous, who do get closure in the films, but Asajj Ventress, her closure is now in a book. So she doesn't show up in this season at all, she's not even mentioned, which is disappointing. Maybe they could have adapted that book into episodes here or something, I don't know. But it would have been nice to have at least acknowledged her because she was a pivotal character. Cad Bane, not seen or heard here at all. His fate, we don't really know. Where's his closure? He was a pivotal character in the Clone Wars. In fact, you could say Cad Bane's introduction in the Clone Wars is what started the Clone Wars getting this big acclaim and attention that it deserves. So the fact that he's not mentioned yet is significant. Then Count Dooku, General Grievous, of course they get the closure they deserve in the films. But they are the main villains of the Clone Wars, and they're not even seen or mentioned this season. In fact, General Grievous gets like one still image look that's like a second long. That's it. Count Dooku gets mentioned by name, and I'm not going to say how he's mentioned, but he's mentioned by name once in this whole season. So the main villains are nowhere to be seen pretty much. That's disappointing again. And of course there are a bunch of other characters, bunch of Jedi and side characters and storylines which they could have drew upon to be like, right, you know what, let's celebrate the Clone Wars, let's acknowledge these people and stories that we've had before, let's give them some closure so people can walk away happy. But no, they're just not seen or heard from, and it's odd. And of course, chances are these characters are going to be seen and heard from again in like comic books or video games or other TV shows or whatever. But it's still, why not put it in this show which established them, which made them who they are? It's just a bit frustrating, to be honest. And I think one of the things this season of the Clone Wars tries to do, perhaps a little too much, is link into events of Star Wars Rebels, the TV show that followed up from this, and of course the current TV show, The Mandalorian. The whole final arc of this show, the Mandalorian arc, feels like it's deliberately trying to establish the events of Mandalore for the Mandalorian TV show. Star Wars Rebels, meanwhile, because the show was cancelled, Star Wars Rebels basically came in and replaced it in a certain regard, and then gave us some sort of closure and continuation for certain characters, which means that the characters in this series, like Rex and Ahsoka and so on, had to somehow fit into what their fates would ultimately be in Rebels, and same with characters like Maul. And it works out really well. Knowing these characters' fates does not hinder this series at all, but it does mean that this series can only go in so many directions with what they want to do with these characters. But it's not only linking into those TV shows, it's also linking in pretty heavily to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So, without going into too many spoilers, the final story arc is towards the end of the Clone Wars, so it's like right next to the events of Revenge of the Sith, and the ways in which it links into that are very dramatic, very emotional. It's brilliantly done. In fact, you could probably watch those 4 episodes alongside Revenge of the Sith, and it would probably be a great viewing experience, regardless of what you think of Revenge of the Sith. Personally, I like it, but I know I'm probably in the minority there. But yeah, this is an animated TV show. Great action throughout. Some of the best action scenes in Star Wars, I would say. It's got one of the best lightsaber fights across the entire Star Wars franchise. And we'll touch on some of this a little later on. But yeah, it is an action series. There is some drama and emotion in there. It is very character driven at times. Everything works out really well. I just have to question their choice of storylines in certain elements. To talk about the characters though, this season really does establish that Star Wars The Clone Wars is all about Ahsoka. Ahsoka was introduced in the Clone Wars, and for such a long time we were like, right, she's introduced in the Clone Wars, but she's not in Revenge of the Sith, so what happens to her character? Well, we knew that she left the Jedi Order. We then know what her fate ended up being in Star Wars Rebels. So what happens between her leaving the Jedi Order and Star Wars Rebels? This does establish some of that. It turns out that she's not doing much, and without going into spoilers, the fact that this cements her as the main character is really cool and really interesting because it gives us a really good focal point. In fact, I say that the middle arc's all about Ahsoka, so is the final arc. The final Mandalore arc, she's the main character, so there's 8 episodes here out of the 12 where she's just the main character, and it's great to see her progression from being an estranged Jedi trying to figure out what the state of the galaxy is, where the Jedi fit in, what her role could possibly be, to then fighting these final battles in the Clone Wars, trying to get like the last hope for the Jedi in there to think, right, is being a Jedi really worth it? Is it the right thing to do? Are the Jedi in the right here? And it really does explore those to certain extents. But by doing this, it does mean that characters like Anakin and Obi-Wan are on the sidelines in so many ways. Yeah, Anakin's one of the main characters in the Bad Batch episodes, but Obi-Wan, he kind of just pops up here and there. And some of the moments with Obi-Wan this season are some of the best, I would say, overall, are some of the more emotional ones. So there's one right early in the first episode, I think it was, where Anakin's talking to Padme. Obi-Wan's on his way, he has to get distracted by someone because, well, he can't know about their relationship. And as it turns out, this isn't spoilers, this first episode, it's something that's kind of hinted at all along. But it turns out Obi-Wan might actually already know about Anakin and Padme's relationship. And the way that they played this up and the amount of emotion and reveals in here is really cool. But one of the running themes here, there are two real running themes throughout here. One about war and the futility of it and the fact that, yeah, there are heroes on both sides, but people die regardless. Is it really worth it? What's the point of it all? And then the other thing is all about the Jedi. Are the Jedi in the right? Are they the ones who we should be looking up to? Are they the ones who are the real heroes of this thing? And what are the limits of the Jedi? What are the Jedi doing right? What are they doing wrong? And it really does a good job of exploring some of that, especially with the Ahsoka stuff in the middle chunk of this season. But yeah, just the last thing about characters, it is disappointing that we don't get closure for so many Clone Wars established characters so far. But to talk about the production, it's an animated show. It's no longer a children's show. This is not a show made for kids anymore. There are some dark graphic stuff in this season and in all the other previous seasons of the Clone Wars. So if you're new to the Clone Wars and you think, oh, this is a kid's show, no. It starts off that way, but it gradually becomes more and more for adults and for all their audiences. But the animation is brilliant. The look of the show, it's so smooth and so fluid, it feels like it's live action. There was motion capture used in a certain fight scene later in the season, which is why that's one of the best fight scenes ever seen in this show and across Star Wars. But it looks like they've had a real budget increase since it was last on the air, and it shows. There's so much detail, so much depth to things, the use of lighting and shadows and colours. It looks like it's live action just turned into like animation, and it's brilliant. There's very few TV shows, very few animated TV shows that look as detailed and as depth-filled as this does, and I just love it. I think this is one of the best looking animated shows ever made, but of course I'm no expert on animated shows by any means. But one of the other ways in which this is advanced, because it is CGI, it means that you're relying on computer technology. So in the earlier seasons, a lot of the characters and a lot of the movements were very blocky, and you could tell that they were like moving a bit more robotic and stiff. Whereas this one, things are a bit more fluid. The emotions across characters' faces are more fluid as well. You can see much more detail and depth in the way people are emoting things. So you can see when someone's shocked or surprised or sad much more clearly than you could in previous seasons. Hell, if you go and look at the trailer for this season that was released like months ago, you'll see a stark difference in the amount of emotion displayed in certain scenes there and what the actual final result is in the TV show. They've made some differences and changes here, and it's really good. It shows how much care and attention has gone into the animation process. But it's very atmospheric. The use of light and the use of shadows sets a really good mood and tone. There is a darkness behind all this because you know things are going to come to an end, and if you know Star Wars and the history that this is set in, it's not a good end for a lot of these individuals. But then to talk about the score, of course, it's based on like the score and themed songs and tunes made by John Williams, but John Williams not actually involved in here. The score in this season is great. Again, there are some really cool moments. In the final Mandalore arc, it sounds like they've actually gone in and got like maybe a little orchestra together to do certain things. They use the main Star Wars theme song for the first time in these episodes. Then the use of music and scoring really does set a good emotional underscore to everything that's going on here. But that's Star Wars The Clone Wars. I am going to go into a few spoilers in just a bit. But so if you haven't seen Star Wars The Clone Wars, you should probably go watch the final season at least, and then come back and watch the rest of this. If you are going to leave though, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_Grant Burton, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel to get more content like this. The more subscribers I get, the more content I can make. It's really encouraging. So thanks for watching so far if you are leaving. If not, stick around. Time for spoilers. So, the Bad Batch episodes, there's a big reveal in these episodes about what they're actually retrieving, what their target is. And it turns out it's a clone trooper called Fives, who's been in the Clone Wars a bunch of times before. And here's the problem. I don't care about Fives. I don't think I ever have. He's a clone trooper who I presumed was dead. So why make this big reveal, big surprising moment for a character that I didn't know there was a potential for him to be alive, for a character I didn't care about? And if I don't care about him as a huge Star Wars fan, chances are there are others like me who don't care about him either. There are probably others like me who just don't even know who he is. So that's significant, and it feels like a big wasted opportunity. And it also brings up the thing of, again, why? Why do these episodes? Why reveal this thing? Why bring this character back? But this also links into other things. The Bad Batch. I've mentioned this already. What happens to the Bad Batch? We introduce them here, then they go off and we never see or hear from them again. Are they going to get their own comic book? Are they going to get their own video game? Who knows? And it's a big problem with Star Wars now, is that why introduce so many different elements in these TV shows only to then ditch them and never see or hear from them again, hoping that someone else will pick them up somewhere and give them their own story? It's a bit annoying. I shouldn't have to read a comic book or play a video game to get closure for something that's introduced in a TV show, especially when this is the final season of that TV show. So the villains of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, there are quite a few villains, but the main ones are Count Dooku and General Grievous, the leader of the Separatists. They're not seen or heard from this season. General Grievous is seen briefly. Count Dooku is only mentioned when it turns out he's died. That's really disappointing. They are the main villains of this show, and yet they are completely absent from the final season. So, yeah, that's super disappointing, especially when for the majority of this show, General Grievous has been displayed as a bit of a joke. And yeah, in Revenge of the Sith, he's meant to be this big, threatening, imposing individual. So it's a shame they couldn't give him like one last hurrah, or they couldn't give Count Dooku one last big moment or something. Now, of course, previous seasons, they've already kind of done that to an extent, but bringing it back, they should have at least had one moment, or one line of dialogue, or one appearance, or something. And the same goes for like Cad Bane, who's missing. This season does bring back Maul in a really cool, interesting way, and it does a great job of making him a really threatening, imposing villain in ways that previous depictions of him haven't quite done. So that works really well. It does give this season a great villain, this character. But speaking of Maul, the way this show explores his character, the fact that we now know that he was aware of Palpatine's grand plan to some extent, is really fascinating and interesting. He didn't know all the particulars of it, which makes sense because chances are he was going to be a pawn just like Dooku. But the problem with having Maul in this season is the same as having like Rex and Ahsoka in this season, is that other properties like Star Wars Rebels and Solo: A Star Wars Story and the comic book arc that came out when this show was initially cancelled have already established what Maul's history and what his story was. So yeah, this is a great way in which they've filled in certain gaps and linked certain elements up. They've linked up the comic book with the events of Solo to an extent, but it does mean they have been limited to what they can and can't do with him. But it doesn't necessarily limit the enjoyability factor. It doesn't necessarily limit how well it works in this show. Knowing the fates of these characters does not make this show worse. If anything, it makes it better because we know that, oh, this bad things are going to happen to these characters. We just don't know specifically what. And the final thing, something again I've kind of touched upon already, the final storyline of this season feels like it's only one of its main goals is to help bolster the current TV show they've got going on, The Mandalorian, which is a bit disappointing again. Like, it's great for The Mandalorian. Chances are, if you've watched The Mandalorian, you're probably also watching The Clone Wars as well, because of the links to that show. But it does times feel like the whole reason Disney made this season of The Clone Wars to provide closure for the show was also secretly to help boost up their own new property that they were making in The Mandalorian. So yeah, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it certainly feels like that in a way. And that's all I've got to talk about Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the final season. I liked it. I thought the final storyline was brilliant. The other two were okay, very enjoyable and fun, and overall it was good. I do recommend it. This is one of the best Star Wars storylines there has been. I'm not just talking about the Mandalore arc here at the end, I'm talking about the show as a whole. If you've not seen Star Wars The Clone Wars, you have to see it if you're a Star Wars fan. It's a must watch. It makes the prequel films better, it connects the prequels to the original trilogy and all other elements of the Star Wars franchise, and it's absolutely amazing that it's been done. I would also say, if you've just been watching Star Wars The Clone Wars for the first time, now you need to go in and watch Rebels, because it is kind of a sequel series of sorts to the Clone Wars. It does continue certain story elements from there. And yeah, that's all I gotta say. Thanks for watching.